Everyone. I'm going to be the one who shuts the party down for long enough to get us started. I'm Gwydion Sullivan. I'm Penn Faulkner's executive director. I am so excited to be here. I want to thank so many people for making this night possible. We've got Sarah Silberman and our Penn Faulkner staff who are amazing. We've got the staff at American, Stephanie Grant, and the staff at American who made this possible. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We have all of our partners here at American, and it absolutely takes a village to do something like this. It's not just one person doing a lot of work, although Sarah did it. Thank you, Sarah. It's humbling to be a part of a literary community like that, and I just want to take a second to talk about that community. Make sure you can all hear me, so I'm going to put the mic right near my face. I want to actually talk about belonging, okay? I want to just take a minute to let it sink in that we're all in this room together for this precious hour, right? That we belong together, no matter who we are or where we came from to get here. We all care about the power of fiction. We all believe in that. We all belong here. We're all each other's people. You're in the room with your people, right? And in this like crazy world that we're living in, to have a place to belong and to remember a sense of our shared humanity is incredibly valuable. It's incredibly rare. And I'm just so grateful to have it, especially now more than ever. So we're all very fortunate. And I want us all to leave here later and carry that sense of belonging home to others. I hope you can all promise to do that in your hearts. Thank you. So tonight we're going to be directing all this goodwill toward Ted Chiang, who we are so excited to have here. And we've got a terrific program. I think you've got printed versions in front of you, but I'm going to run it down just fast. First, we're going to hear Ted read a little bit. And then we're going to hear Ted in what I'm sure will be a sparkling good conversation with Jung Yoon, who is not only a Penn Faulkner board member, but a spectacular novelist in her own right, and the chair of our board's Malamud committee. And at the end of that conversation, we will all get a chance to ask questions too, because remember, we all belong here. This is all for us, right? Then we have the privilege of being joined by Jana Malamud Smith, who will handle the presentation of the actual Penn, Bernard, and Anne Malamud Award for Excellence in the Short Story. It's a tremendous honor that we have her here with us. And we'll be followed by some short remarks by Ted himself. And then finally, Catherine Boone, the president of the Penn Faulkner Board, will close us out. So lickety split will be sad that we're leaving. So enjoy the moment, stay in the moment. But first, I am delighted to welcome to the stage, or to the podium, Despina Kakudaki, who is Associate Professor of Literature here in American and also the author of, I'm going to get this title right because it's baller, Anatomy of a Robot, Literature, Cinema, and the Cultural Work of Artificial People. Welcome, Despina.
Thank you, everyone. I wanted to start by asking a question, which is, what makes a text science fiction? Critics used to describe the way science fiction creates a sense of wonder, a feeling of being transported into other worlds, able to experience radically different bodies, environments, or worldviews. Others explained how a science fiction story extrapolates from what we know in our world, gravity, the laws of physics, the workings of matter or time, and extending these realities, the realities of these worlds, until they reach unexpected, exaggerated, or unfathomable outcomes. The result may be a sense of productive alienation, a cognitive estrangement, in which we fly to other worlds in order to look at our world anew. In political terms, this estrangement allows science fiction to function as a thought experiment, a way to imagine or see otherwise, a way to denaturalize what we take for granted, which in itself may be promising for inventing new forms of political being, alternative ways of thinking, unmooring what we take as given, and then imagining better possible futures. The way we read science fiction also matters. The way we switch codes or reading protocols, the way we can see metaphor become real, the way we can see monsters become species. We read science fiction in forms that are subjunctive, with things that might be true or things that could be real, and writers delight in constructing completely unreal things while making them feel natural and coherent. Think about the following sentence, for example. When the second tachyon decelerator went offline, I had to spacewalk the remote Trent cells to finally dock the darn thing on Ilion 7. I just hope this cargo is worth it. Reading this, you know you are not here in this world, and you also know that the narrator is landing or docking some kind of vessel. There are technical problems. Ilion 7 might be a planet or a moon or a space station, and there's some kind of valuable and mysterious cargo. And this world is set, stable, at the level of a sentence. It's very clear, despite the neologism of Trent cells and the non-existent illogical tachyon decelerator. Now, Ted Chiang's work is very different from this sentence in two ways. First of all, it has very few neologisms. Instead of depending on a word or a phrase to deliver the newness of a new world, he uses tone and style to create narratives that read like a memoir, a scientific treatise, a prayer, a transcript of interviews, a story one tells to a future child that is already past. To paraphrase Gertrude Stein here, the words may be the same as in a mainstream fiction text, but in this context, they mean very different. Sometimes the experience Stein scholar. Sometimes the experience of reading these stories is equivalent to a cognitive estrangement slow burn, in which you gradually boil in your assumptions about words and worlds until you emerge, boiled, at a very different place that is both miles and years away from where you started and right next to it. Just like the bricklayers and workers in the story Tower of Babylon, whose drive upward, building an enormous tower, lands them back to where they started in their cylindrical seal of a world. In Story of Your Life, there may be one radical encounter with the heptapod aliens and their holographic language sense, but the more radical encounter is with time, with loss, with the experience of a life, your life, as a complete and sadly too quick event. Tenses such as past and future are choreographed to reverse themselves as the present time of the story includes the future from which a different future is past. The same moment starts and ends the story, the asking of one question, the origin of a life that is also its assured end. We say you when the interlocutor is there or will be there, like you are here. And this you in this story is both present and absent, an active presence that's gone, a missingness that is grammatical, and also an emotional question. The second way in which Ted Chiang stories differ from what we sometimes expect from science fiction is their sustained use of ambiguity. There is a distinct pleasure usually in science fiction in becoming familiar with alien worlds, in recognizing ourselves in otherness, in seeing a new form of physics or consciousness and feeling it as real. The short story, the lifeblood of science fiction before this era of infinite sequels, franchises, and mega multiverse texts, specializes in creating dense, precise, fully realized worlds, and then yanking us out of them too soon, making us know these worlds in detail, making us long for more action, more adventure, more engagement there. But after reading a story such as Omphalos or Exhalation, I'm not sure I know these worlds, regardless of how carefully I read them. In Omphalos, for example, we are following the prayers of a scientist, an archaeologist, whose certainty about the state of the world is shaken by new astronomical discoveries. In her world, it is clear and provable that God created the earth and all the plants and beings in them, on earth, because there are quantifiable facts such as ancient trees that do not have growth rings, abalone shells that are smooth as if created all in one moment, human mummies that have no navels. In ancient Greek mythology, Omphalos, the Greek word for navel, also refers to Zeus's experiment to find the center of the world. He sends two eagles from the two ends of the world and places a sacred stone where they meet in what became Delphi, the oracle, the place of the oracle of Apollo, and a major religious and diplomatic site for the ancient world. But at the end of the story, when our scientist goes back to dig for more artifacts that would prove this instantaneous creation myth, I still have questions. Are the naval-less aliens, are the naval-less beings aliens? Are they robots? Are they manufactured by the church in order to prove the theocratic, geocentric point of view? Are their baloney shells just made of plastic? In the similarity that I see between her world and mine, there is a mirage, a kind of confusion that instead of clarifying that world for me, confuses me more. In the totalizing way in which belief and a foundational worldview can absorb even the most outrageous contradictions, I become aware of my expectations of logic so different from these characters. I want to close this quick set of impressions with the word lung. The story Exhalation starts with, it has long been said that air, parenthesis, which others called argon, is the source of life. And I already start with an asterisk on argon, like I have to think about what that means later in the story. The story continues. Every day we consume 2 lungs heavy with air. Every day we remove the empty ones from our chest and replace them with full ones. If you know me, you know I've written a book about robots, and this idea of looking inside to find lungs is fascinating. I'm going with that. But the story describes this communal aspect of going to a filling station, catching up with neighbors while refilling your lungs, because when one is alone, the act of opening one's chest and replacing one's lungs can seem little better than a chore. The production of ambiguity here is not in the neologism. It's a neologism that Chiang does not create. He could have said canisters, air tanks, renebulizers, whatever else, to signal to me that this story has beings of a radically different nature. By its familiarity, the word lungs alienates me in a different direction. There is a particularity, a precision in this almost mathematical development of the story, in which this being will try to prove the function of these lungs in a scientific way, but the precision is also coupled with a resistance to stabilize this world and to stabilize what are these beings and what do these lungs look like. It's a resistance for certainty. This relationship between language, world building, and tone that are particular and precise, while the overall form of the action remains ambiguous, is not characteristic of the classic science fiction short story, which delights in closures and punchlines and in alien clarities, and that wants to produce the desire for this extension, more action, more events. It is, however, very characteristic of Chiang's work. Sometimes I experience a desire not for extension, but for a handle, a way to land. Most of the time I marvel at this sustained and deeply humanist treatment of language, his ability to create this unique open-endedness. This feels to me like a new form of productive alienation, not just from mainstream protocols of science fiction, but also from science fiction protocols of reading. And with these comments, I present to you Ted Chiang. We are so honored to have you at the American House.
Thank you, Despina. That was a pretty amazing introduction. Yeah. Wow, I don't know if I can follow that one up. Thank you all for being here. So I'm going to read a very short story. Most of my work is a little too long to be read in the time we have, but I picked one which is short enough. It's a little unconventional, but I hope you'll bear with me. So this is a story called The Great Silence. The humans use Arecibo to look for extraterrestrial intelligence. Their desire to make a connection is so strong that they've created an ear capable of hearing across the universe. But I and my fellow parrots are right here. Why aren't they interested in listening to our voices? We're a non-human species, capable of communicating with them. Aren't we exactly what humans are looking for? The universe is so vast that intelligent life must surely have arisen many times. The universe is also so old that even one technological species would have had time to expand and fill the galaxy. Yet there's no sign of life anywhere except on Earth. Humans call this the Fermi paradox. One proposed solution to the Fermi paradox is that intelligent species actively try to conceal their presence to avoid being targeted by hostile invaders. Speaking as a member of a species that has been driven nearly to extinction by humans, I can attest that this is a wise strategy. It makes sense to remain quiet and avoid attracting attention. The Fermi paradox is sometimes known as the Great Silence. The universe ought to be a cacophony of voices, but instead, it's disconcertingly quiet. Some humans theorize that intelligent species go extinct before they can expand into outer space. If they're correct, then the hush of the night sky is the silence of a graveyard. Hundreds of years ago, my kind was so plentiful that the Rio Abajo forest resounded with our voices. Now we're almost gone. Soon, this rainforest may be as silent as the rest of the universe. There was an African gray parrot named Alex. He was famous for his cognitive abilities. Famous among humans, that is. A human researcher named Irene Pepperberg spent 30 years studying Alex. She found that not only did Alex know the words for shapes and colors, he actually understood the concepts of shape and color. Many scientists were skeptical that a bird could grasp abstract concepts. Humans like to think they're unique. But eventually, Pepperberg convinced them that Alex wasn't just repeating words, that he understood what he was saying. Out of all my cousins, Alex was the one who came closest to being taken seriously as a communication partner by humans. Alex died suddenly, when he was still relatively young. The evening before he died, Alex said to Pepperberg, "You be good. I love you." If humans are looking for a connection with a non-human intelligence, what more can they ask for than that? Every parrot has a unique call that it uses to identify itself. Biologists refer to this as the parrot's contact call. In 1974, astronomers used Arecibo to broadcast a message into outer space, intended to demonstrate human intelligence. That was humanity's contact call. In the wild, parrots address each other by name. One bird imitates another's contact call to get the other bird's attention. If humans ever detect the Arecibo message being sent back to Earth, they will know someone is trying to get their attention. Parrots are vocal learners. We can learn to make new sounds after we've heard them. It's an ability few animals possess. A dog may understand dozens of commands, but it will never do anything but bark. Humans are vocal learners too. We have that in common. So humans and parrots share a special relationship with sound. We don't simply cry out. We pronounce. We enunciate. Perhaps that's why humans built Arecibo the way they did. A receiver doesn't have to be a transmitter, but Arecibo is both. It's an ear for listening and a mouth for speaking. Humans have lived alongside parrots for thousands of years, and only recently have they considered the possibility that we might be intelligent. I suppose I can't blame them. We parrots used to think humans weren't very bright. It's hard to make sense of behavior that's so different from your own. But parrots are more similar to humans than any extraterrestrial species will be. And humans can observe us up close. They can look us in the eye. How do they expect to recognize an alien intelligence if all they can do is eavesdrop from 100 light years away? It's no coincidence that the word aspiration means both hope and the act of breathing. When we speak, we use the breath in our lungs to give our thoughts a physical form. The sounds we make are simultaneously our intentions and our life force. I speak, therefore I am. Vocal learners, like parrots and humans, are perhaps the only ones who fully comprehend the truth of this. There's a pleasure that comes with shaping sounds with your mouth. It's so primal and visceral that throughout their history, humans have considered the activity a pathway to the divine. Pythagorean mystics believed that vowels represented the music of the spheres and chanted to draw power from them. Pentecostal Christians believe that when they speak in tongues, they're speaking the language used by angels in heaven. Brahmin Hindus believe that reciting mantras, they're strengthening the building blocks of reality. Only a species of vocal learners would ascribe such importance to sound in their mythologies. We parrots can appreciate that. According to Hindu mythology, the universe was created with a sound, Om. It's a syllable that contains within it everything that ever was and everything that will be. When the Arecibo telescope is pointed at the space between stars, it hears a faint hum. Astronomers call that the cosmic microwave background. It's the residual radiation of the Big Bang, the explosion that created the universe 14 billion years ago. But you can also think of it as a barely audible reverberation of that original Om. That syllable was so resonant that the night sky will keep vibrating for as long as the universe exists. When Arecibo is not listening to anything else, it hears the voice of creation. We Puerto Rican parrots have our own myths. They're simpler than human mythology, but I think humans would take pleasure from them. Alas, our myths are being lost as my species dies out. I doubt the humans will have deciphered our language before we're gone. So the extinction of my species doesn't just mean the loss of a group of birds. It's also the disappearance of our language, our rituals, our traditions. It's the silencing of our voice. Human activity has brought my kind to the brink of extinction, but I don't blame them for it. They didn't do it maliciously. They just weren't paying attention. And humans create such beautiful myths. What imaginations they have. Perhaps that's why their aspirations are so immense. Look at Arecibo. Any species who can build such a thing must have greatness within it. My species probably won't be here for much longer. It's likely that we'll die before our time and join the great silence. But before we go, we are sending a message to humanity. We just hope the telescope at Arecibo will enable them to hear it. The message is this: you be good. I love you.
I was so glad you read that story. Beautiful. Well, I guess to get us started, I wanted to talk about a little bit about short fiction in particular. Bernard Malamud had a wonderful interview in the Paris Review's Art of Fiction series in which he talked about starting to write short fiction at the age of 8 or 9. And he memorably described it as feeling the glow, which is a description that I've always really loved. I understand that you started writing a novel, an adventure novel, when you were about 11. And you gave up that form and switched to short stories, which is what you've held to for all of your writing career up to this point. So I'm wondering about the particular power of short fiction for you.
So, I suppose that, when I was very young, I probably tried writing a novel because, that was what I had read. And I guess I was probably, sort of really just starting out as a reader of fiction. Um, and I think most of what young people, what children read, probably are novels. They're short novels, but I think they probably are novels. But as I became more of a reader, uh, uh, and more of a reader of science fiction, um, I started reading more short stories. And short stories play a sort of a central role in the history of science fiction. Um, the magazines throughout sort of the mid 20th century were really kind of um, the crucible of science fiction, the laboratory. All of the major science fiction writers, they were uh, writing short fiction primarily. Um, and at the time, for various historical reasons, uh, science fiction novels were not, they existed, but they were not central to science fiction publishing. So, I guess as I became more versed in science fiction, I read a lot of short stories, and I guess I was really drawn to them. Um, I think, and like, I guess there is also this aspect where I think, a lot of young writers, they might start out writing short stories simply because they're easy to finish. Um, and, um, but there is this constant, sort of message that writers receive that, you might start out writing short stories, but then you advance to novels. And uh, I guess, I never felt that. I never felt a real attraction to novels in that way. Um, I uh, I think short stories really are they're the medium in which I think maybe best accomplish what I'm trying to do.
I love that. I just want to take a brief moment to acknowledge the members of our Penn-Faulkner board and also the selection committee for this award, and especially Marie Arana and Tope Fullerin and our advisory committee. This process of choosing this award has been about a year in the making, and one of the things that was so much fun to talk about when it came to your work is that it does so many things so incredibly well. Marie and Topi and I, in particular, we sort of fixated on the intertextuality of it, the temporality, the atemporality. But we really talked at length about how every story that we read, it made us think largely about bigger questions. And I know that that's something that kind of guides your work, this idea of um, of philosophical questions, almost like thought experiments. You're very generous with your readers in your story notes about how you come up with the ideas and the inspiration for your stories. But I'm curious to know, do you yet understand why some ideas rise to the occasion of a story?
I don't have a clear articulation of, like what ideas, rise to that occasion. All I can say is that, ideas for stories, they come and mostly they come and go. And, but sometimes an idea just keeps recurring over and over again over a period of months or sometimes years. And when that happens, I realize, well, there's clearly something about this story idea which gnaws at me, and I should probably think about what that is. And so then, I start thinking about that in a more deliberate fashion. And in general, I guess I'm looking for some philosophical question that I think, I've unconsciously been drawn to. And, so I try and identify that philosophical question that is sort of implicit in this story idea. And then once I, get a sense of what that is, then I start thinking about story scenarios and what kind of scenario would best dramatize this philosophical question. And so then I can actually write a story about it. So that's the best I can say. But it's hard for me to, like I said, it's hard for me to sort of articulate. Like, is there something? What is it that makes a story rise to that? Or cross that bar?
I like the idea of repetition, and it's something that keeps coming back until it needs to be worked out in some way, and the form that it takes is a story, it sounds like. I have to refer to my notes to this one because one of my former students at George Washington University is such a huge fan of yours. And I think that if he lived in DC or even somewhere on the East Coast, he would be with us tonight. But he's in California now. So I emailed him and I mentioned that I was doing this event with you. And I said, David, would you like to pose a question to Ted Chiang? He emailed back 4 minutes later. And then it was very sweet, actually. He texted after he emailed to make sure that I got the email. But I think that just speaks to how excited he was to be part of this process. I did have to do some editing to this question. So let me read what David had to say. All of your stories seem to have such detailed knowledge of so many different subjects, and it's often hard for me to tell where the real laws of physics or mathematics, et cetera, turn into fiction. And for those of you who are not as familiar with Ted's work, what David is referring to is how so many of his stories just seem to expertly and authoritatively address topics like engineering, Gestalt theory, neuroscience, linguistics, et cetera. So David asked, as someone who constantly over-researches or uses research as a way of procrastinating from my own writing, I wanted to know about your approach to research and what typically exists first for you. Is it knowledge in a particular subject area that you want to tell a story about, or the realization that you need to develop knowledge in a subject in order to tell a story well? And then far into the paragraph, he said, maybe it doesn't work like that at all.
So I guess there are, I guess maybe there, I think that distinction is a reasonable one. There is sort of, general knowledge that I might have, which just comes from just reading about, science or philosophy or, history or whatever. And so that often plays a role in the conception of the story. But then when it's actually, as I start, once I've, I guess, fleshed out the story scenario, and then I have to start thinking about how do I write this story, then there is knowledge I need, there's research I have to do in order to write the story. And I guess for me, what I the way I think about it is like, if I don't know anything about, say this, certain field, like, okay, like if I have a character who has a certain job and I really don't know anything about that job, it's like, I have no idea what a scene looks like, um, and so I need to know enough about, that job so that I can at least, uh, envision a scene. And so I might start reading about, that profession until I feel like I, have a sense of, what a scene, with that, in that character, involving that character, what does that character do during the day? When I haven't, I need to have enough information that I can, sort of picture a scene. And that is, so that is, I guess, that's where the sort of deliberate targeted research comes in. Um, there's, so like, on the one hand, like there's physics that appears in some of my stories. I don't really need to, I've never really had to do a lot of research into physics in order to write a story because I've always been interested in physics. And so that part just is, often, where the stories come from. But, in terms of, like, what does a character with this job actually do, in their day to day? That's something that I need to research. And, I don't know how much is, enough or how much is too much, but, for me, it's just, do I have a sense of, what a scene where this involving this character, what should that scene look like? And that is, when I, so there's some amorphous, ill-defined level where it's like, okay, I think I have some idea of like, how the scene, should flow.
Was it true that it took nearly 5 years of research for stories of your life in terms of the linguistics and linguistic theory?
That, yeah, that is true, but is, that I don't want to say that, I spent 5 years, just researching linguistics. In that case, when I had the initial conception for the story, I realized like this was going to be a very technically ambitious story. And I was not at all confident that I would be able to write that story. And so I sort of, I was, so that was definitely something that was in my mind, alongside the fact that, okay, my protagonist is a linguist, and I don't know a lot about linguists. Or, I mean, I have a certain interest. I've always had a certain interest in linguistics, but yeah, I don't know a lot about, how linguists work. So, mostly, I was thinking like, okay, I should put this, I should sort of put this story on kind of the back burner and wait until I feel like my technical skills have risen to the point where I can tackle something that is as ambitious as what I am envisioning the story will be. And in the meantime, I'll just read books about linguistics, as much as I can. And so, yeah, so about 5 years pass. And then I'm like, okay, so like, um, you know, at one level, I'm thinking like, well, I'm never going to be a linguist, so like, there's so I probably don't need to keep doing more reading on linguistics. And also, it's like, I have been just sort of thinking about this story on the back burner for a number of years, and so I think like, okay, I think I'm maybe ready to tackle it. I'm going to give it a try. Um, so yeah, it did take 5 years, but yeah, I can't say that it was like, the goal was to, become so well versed in linguistics, and it took 5 years for me to do that. There were a couple different factors involved in it taking that much time.
Well, it is such a beautiful story, and it is so ambitious. And when a story is that big and the payoff is that great, it's just, I mean, for those of you who have read it, it's just like a really wonderful thing. I'm going to shift gears here a little bit, because a couple of years ago, you did an interview with Ezra Klein for his New York Times podcast, which was a really fun conversation. And in the preamble to the conversation, Ezra referred to you as one of the great living writers of religious fiction, even though he's an atheist and a sci-fi legend. I know you're much too humble to talk about the superlatives that are all built and baked into that sentence, but I did want to talk about this idea of religious fiction. That's not a descriptor that I would necessarily use for your work, although thinking about Omphalos and Hell is the Absence of a God and some of your other stories, there are variations of God. So I was curious to know why the act of religious inquiry seems to be a recurring presence in your stories.
So, I was not raised in any religion, and I had a very vague, as a child, I had just sort of this vague notion of Christianity just through cultural osmosis of, like, okay, there's Christmas and people go to church. Actually, there's this funny quote from the writer Mark Salzman, who he wrote a novel about religion, and he said that before he started working on that novel, his knowledge of Christianity was mostly derived from the speech that Linus gives in the short "Merry Christmas, Charlie Brown." And so that I think would be a fair descriptor of me as well. But I guess one of the things that I guess I remain consistently interested in religion at an abstract level, because it is not something that I have ever experienced. I've never had deep religious feeling of my own, and to me, I guess I just regard it as a very interesting way to understand the universe. The idea that this is how you frame everything, that is, I guess, that is intensely interesting to me. And the fact that many people say that they find comfort in religion, and there are times when I can see, like, yeah, I guess maybe that would be comforting, but there are also times when I think about it, it's like, is this really comforting? Because it's like, because religion doesn't actually prevent bad things from happening to you. So it's like, I sort of feel like if you're an atheist and your child dies of cancer, that is horrible. But you can at least sort of, say like, okay, well, it's the random happenstance of the universe. But if you are devoutly religious and your child dies of cancer, then it seems like, you have a much tougher problem you have a much more difficult question to answer. And so, it's like, but people continue to believe in, in God. People don't, a lot of people don't simply like stop believing in God when something like, their child dying of cancer happens. And so that is, that I think is just very interesting. That, their way of understanding the universe is uh, um, is something they hold so deeply that they have to they have to find a way to make sense of it in that framework, even though like to me sort of from a like naive outsider perspective, it's like, oh, I mean, maybe it'd be easier to just say like, well, there is no God. And um, and so I guess I am constantly, drawn back to this idea of like, what is it like to understand the universe in this way? And that is, um, yeah, that there is this fact that like there's a sense in which it offers answers, but they're not easy answers. Uh, um, but people prefer having those answers even when they are not easy. And I guess yeah, I just keep thinking about that.
Time for one last question, Sarah, before audience Q&A? Okay. Let me do a little bit of skipping here. Oh, all right. Well, I'll end with this one. In 2002, when your first collection came out, you did another interview with Locus Magazine, and I'm going to read a brief excerpt of that conversation. You said,
You're coming up some real deep cuts here.
I know. But there's a method to this madness. Everyone refers to science fiction's ability to evoke a sense of wonder. That is definitely a goal of mine because I remember the sense of wonder I experienced when I read science fiction when I was younger. I'd like to be able to evoke that in other people. I recognize that the things that we say at the beginning of our publishing careers may evolve and expand and change over time. And you've been writing for many decades now. And I'm curious to know, is wonder still something that guides you?
I suppose that may there may be some shift in that. So and okay, so maybe I can sort of tie this in with the religion question, because I think one of the things that science fiction I think does is it can give a reader a sense of the awe that scientists feel when they make a discovery. And I think scientific awe is the closest secular analog to religious awe that there is. I think there is something very, there's a lot in common between the awe that scientists experience and the awe that religious people experience. So that so that and that the awe that comes with understanding the universe better was definitely something that I was interested in evoking, and I would say and I would say yeah, I am still interested in evoking, but I guess maybe the if there has been a shift in emphasis in my writing, it might be that okay, so religion is not only about awe. Religion is also about, in some ways, providing perspective, making sense of one's life, uh, finding meaning in one's life. And so I guess, maybe that is something that is maybe I can discern a shift in emphasis in my work toward that kind of experience where you have a moment of uh, uh, clarity, about how to understand your life in a how to have a better perspective on your life, how to make sense of what you have been through. So yeah, and that's not awe, that's not wonder, but I think it is something that that people look for in fiction. That's one of the things that fiction provides. Um, and so it's so I guess maybe in a way it's, it's a perspectival shift, but instead of it being sort of about the external universe, it may be more a perspective shift in a more personal context.
Wonderful. I think that's a great segue to some audience Q&A that we have a few minutes for. I think a mic is coming to you, sir.
Hello. All right. How do you relate to the broader science fiction community, and how has that changed over time? Like, do you cosplay?
Well, so I think those are actually two very distinct questions. I do not cosplay, but I I definitely feel close to the science fiction community. I don't think that will ever change. So when people talk about genre, there are a lot of different definitions that people propose for what constitutes a genre. And, they all have some validity. But my personal favorite definition of a genre is that a genre is a conversation. A genre is an ongoing dialogue between writers and readers and critics that has been going on for decades. And I will always identify as a science fiction writer because science fiction is the conversation that I want to be a part of. Science fiction, when I was starting out, the science fiction conversation was what I wanted to join. And so, yeah, I don't think I will ever get away from feeling like, yeah, the conversation of science fiction is one that, like I want to remain a participant in. And so in that sense, I always think of myself as a science fiction writer, as a member of the science fiction community.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Chiang. Thank you for being here tonight. I'm a grad student here pursuing my MFA, and I'm in a science fiction world building class right now, where we're reading Jemison and Butler and Ursula K. Le Guin, and you, of course. And so I wanted to ask you, how consciously do you think about world building in your science fiction?
Well, okay, there's sort of this whole talk that I sometimes give on, related to the question of world building. Okay, so very, very briefly, I'll say that in speculative or fantastic fiction, broadly speaking, I'd say that there are two impulses or two sort of directions that we can sort of identify. One is naturalism, and the other is expressionism. Naturalism, in the context that I'm referring to, what I mean by naturalism is the act of, or the thought process of like, given such a premise, what would logically follow from that? Expressionism is, and in the context that I'm using it, expressionism, what I mean by that is externalizing the internal. And so, whenever there is a fantastic or speculative element in, a piece of fiction, I think it's worth thinking about, like, how much is this naturalistic extrapolation, and how much of it is a form of expressionism? Is it, a way to sort of make concrete something that was abstract? And most speculative fiction is doing, some of both to varying degrees. And I think in general, it's, I think, helpful to think about, like, it's helpful to identify when the author is sort of engaged in naturalism and when the author is engaged in expressionism, because then how to approach it, how to take it, what kind of criticisms are appropriate to bring to bear. Because if someone is engaged in expressionism, it doesn't really make sense to try and criticize it from a naturalistic perspective. And so, in my own work, I'd say, very far on the naturalism side. But that's just a personal preference on my part. I'm not going to say that naturalism is better. I'm just going to say that, like, it is useful to. I think it can be useful to sort of identify these two different things, and then when you have hopefully the author has signaled when they are engaged in what at some level. Hopefully the author is not sort of sending mixed messages, and then and that will let your readers know when they should be sort of reading it in sort of with one set of protocols and versus reading it with another set of protocols. And again, they're going to be doing both in the same work, but you can usually, or ideally, you can kind of tell when they are doing one versus when they're doing the other.
Sarah, do we have one more question? Stephanie?
We have the mic. We have the mic over here. The two of us have the same question.
We have an AI question.
Yeah.
We're both writers and we're both named plaintiffs in the lawsuit suing Meta.
I can't believe you said that out loud.
And well, it's been in the paper, actually. And we're both being deposed next week.
We're both being deposed next week, and we're very afraid.
And we're wondering, we're suing Meta on behalf of every writer in the world because of all this our work that's been scraped to train the large language models. And we're wondering if you think that you should be compensated for your work having been used to train the large language model. And if so, how much do you think they owe you?
It's not what I was going to ask. Oh. No, you can ask that. I mean, they're going to ask us that, but yeah, I mean, my question was more broad, like what is the threat of these large language models in your view?
So, I'm not gonna, try and, put a number on it, or,
Lawyers told us to say too.
you know, you know, but, although I guess, like maybe you could, sort of refer to, I think, the New York Times lawsuit against OpenAI, they are asking for, damages, which, I can't remember what their number is, but they have damages on a per infringement basis, which total, in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So, I think, that's reasonable, so, what threat do large language models pose? I guess, they're one way to think about this, I guess, is, how likely is it that these machines can do what humans do, and what danger do they pose in that sense, and then what is the danger that they pose in the context of CEOs believing that they can do what humans do? So, I think the threat that they pose in terms of like actually being able to replace people, I think is very, very low. I think the threat is, by the time CEOs figure that out, vast industries could be ruined. Permanent damage could be done to our culture in the time that it takes for CEOs to realize, like, oh, actually, maybe we were sold a bill of goods. So so I think the threat is significant, not because of because these large language models actually have capabilities to do what people do, but because CEOs have bought into this idea, and they and I think this is true not just for writers, but I think for many, many jobs. People who don't work in a profession underestimate what is involved in that profession. And this is sadly, this is true of the vast majority of CEOs. They really don't appreciate what their employees do. They think, well, their job doesn't look that hard, and so they think that could be easily replaced. And it turns out that these jobs are actually very hard, and people who are trying to sell you a product are going to say like, oh, this will replace them. And if you're a CEO, you're interested in cutting payroll costs, and so you're incentivized to believe them. So I think there the threat is the threat is absolutely enormous, and that is so I guess in some ways the battle is or I guess one part of the battle is trying to make everyone know, like people in every profession need to sort of make people know that this job isn't easy. The whatever job it is, the part that, you who don't work in this industry see, uh, you do not really grasp what is involved. That, so I think there needs to be a lot of people, I guess, kind of, educating everyone about what it is that we do to people who, only have the most superficial idea, the most superficial impression of what any job entails.
Thanks for that question. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Jana Malamud Smith for the presentation of the award.
I want to also join everyone in thanking the Penn Faulkner Committee, the Penn Malamud Committee. I thank you all for coming. And before I get to my short prepared remarks, I was so stimulated. I want to just make a few comments. One is that, Ted, while you mentioned the awe of science and the awe of religion, what you've left out, I think, is the profound awe of a gorgeous work of art. And we're living that. And your life's work represents those moments. And it is what I think embodies the community that Gwydion mentioned, that's one of the great shared experiences is encountering those occasions of awe and how invaluable they are. And also, I just want to comment on two other things that have come up. One is how beautifully this evening represents, and I think you talked about it, the mastery of craft and how hard that is and how hard one has to labor to master a craft and how invaluable it is to make that labor and how underappreciated it is in the world. And it is as old as there are humans, that mastery of craft. And it is just it isn't appreciated in the superficiality. And finally, the third thing is that we just witnessed tonight, besides the beauty of hearing a story together, which is another rare privilege. We get to hear them in our car on Audible books, but to hear them together alive is such, to me, a privilege. But finally, the other thing is, in a world where language is used so much of the time in corrupt ways for domination, for dishonesty, for manipulation, for everything we've just witnessed ad nauseum in the last few months, to see conversation represent itself as an exchange of thought, of quietude, of ideas is also so precious. And these are some of the meanings that I see in the community that Gwydion has named and in the effort that is so present here. So we've had this award now for 36 years, and I've had the privilege of handing the award over, and it celebrates writers and readers. And my family established it particularly to celebrate the short story. Partly because the short story is an elegant, concise form, partly because my father was rather gifted at it and probably better at it than novels. And my family wanted to remember him by honoring others who enjoy and master this genre of creative work. It always haunted my father that he grew up in a home without any books. His immigrant family struggled. And it wasn't until he was 9 or 10 and recovering from a siege of pneumonia that had almost killed him that his poor shopkeeper father bought him the 20-volume encyclopedia set called the Book of Knowledge. It was a big financial reach, but my father never forgot the gift. It was completely formative for him, not only because of the generosity in it, but because it confirmed his nascent sense of himself as a person who valued books. Like so many writers, my father was first a reader. Stories, he said many times, allowed him to imagine a world beyond the painful one in which he found himself. They expanded his sensibility and offered him intimate company. I thought about the extraordinary power that books possess when I recently spoke with a young friend from Afghanistan who's now doing graduate study here. I had asked her about her father, a man who had been forced to drop out of school when he was a young teenager so he could take over the family farm after his own father died. The hard labor of it, together with the endless danger of being a member of a minority persecuted by the Taliban, aged him prematurely, and he died several years ago. His daughter, remembering him, described how at night in the dark, he would use the tiny blue light from his transistor radio to read by, and how he read with pleasure whatever he could find, whatever came into his hands. This is a man who once had to hide in a bread oven to escape being murdered by vigilantes. A man who urged his children to pursue education, which is why his daughter's in Washington now. But I think about that blue light and that radio. I mention his story and my father's as a way to remind us about the access the written word offers to an infinite, invisible universe, a place where the mind can always seek refuge and its own kind of liberty. It is an honor. It is to honor this robust, dynamic, imaginative space and all those who enrich it with their writing that it gives me great pleasure tonight to give the 2024 Malamud Award for Excellence in the Short Story to Ted Chiang.
Thanks so much to the Penn Faulkner Foundation's board for this incredible honor. I also just need to thank my agent, Kirby Kim, for revitalizing my career, and my wife, Marcia, for all of her love and support. I'm not a prolific writer, and because of that, I have long struggled with the question of whether I could call myself a writer. Some of this is the typical insecurity that I think many writers experience. But some of it also has to do with certain received ideas about what it means to be a real writer. In the years after I graduated college, I read some essays by the science fiction writer Gene Wolfe. And he wrote that if you only have 1 hour a week in which to write, you will write during that hour, even if you were in the back of an open pickup truck speeding down the highway. And I thought, I could never write under those conditions. Gene Wolfe also said that a real writer cannot not write. And my thought was, I can not write for long stretches of time. So maybe I'm not a real writer. I revered Gene Wolfe's work. And so it took a long time for me to realize that his idea of a writer was not the only valid one. Eventually, I came to accept that there are many ways to be a writer. And being someone who writes short stories at long intervals is one such way. I'm not going to go so far as to say that I'm happy with the fact that I'm not prolific, but I don't beat myself up about it as much these days. Receiving the Penn Malamud Award is a reminder that I can call myself a writer. And it prompts me to think about what qualifies a person for that title. So let me quote a passage from the essayist Annie Dillard. She writes, "A well-known writer got collared by a university student who asked, 'Do you think I could be a writer?' 'Well,' the writer said, 'I don't know. Do you like sentences?' The writer could see the student's amazement. 'Sentences? Do I like sentences? I'm 20 years old, and do I like sentences?' Annie Dillard then mentions a painter that she once knew. She asked him how he came to be a painter, and he said, 'I liked the smell of paint.' Whatever my weaknesses as a writer are, I can at least say that I like sentences. In the last couple of years, I've been asked if I might have any interest in writing for the movies or for video games, which are becoming the dominant modes by which young people consume narrative. And there are a variety of reasons why I'm not suited to work in those mediums, but one reason is that those are mediums in which the sentences are not that important. By contrast, prose fiction consists of sentences and nothing but. And that is how I know that prose fiction is where I belong, because I like sentences. Thank you very much.
Ted Chiang, one more time. Thank you so much for being here, being a part of this. Our friends at Politics and Prose have Ted books for sale outside, so you all can pick up a copy. And Ted has been kind enough to agree to sit for a book signing after this, so you can get a holiday gift for yourself or for friends just outside as soon as we're done. I'm Catherine Boone. I'm the president of the board of the Penn Faulkner Foundation. And I wanted to thank, again, our partners at AU for hosting this evening, for supporting this event for so long. And of course, our profoundest thanks to Jana Malamud Smith and the Malamud family for inspiring and sustaining this event for so long. And mostly I want to thank you all for coming here tonight. Both Jana and Gwydion described so beautifully the literary community that is such an important part of both this city and our lives, and has so much to add to our experience as readers and as writers. And that's what Penn Faulkner is all about. And we have other literary events throughout the year, both virtual and in person, that we would love to see you at and become more of a part of this beautiful community that we have here. We also would love your support for our ongoing programming. On your seats, there are donation cards, and if you would take a look, we cannot do this important work without you, and we appreciate your support. Our other landmark event on the calendar is the Penn Faulkner Awards, which is in May. And I'm delighted to be able to tell you that our literary champion for this year, it will be Dr. Carla Hayden, the Librarian of Congress. Dr. Hayden is both the first woman and the first Black person to lead the Library of Congress, and she has been a visionary for modernization and expansion of the library in that time. So we'll be delighted to honor her and the winner of the 2025 Penn Faulkner Awards, who's yet to be determined. So please look in your emails for that event, and we would love to see you all there. And thank you again for coming and for being part of such a vibrant literary community.